These elections are being conducted in South Korea. We're joined in by our correspondent Bruce Harrison, who's joining us live from Seoul. Now, good afternoon to you, Bruce. The fact that parliamentary elections are going ahead in South Korea, some would say this is almost counterintuitive at a time when there is this pandemic that is virtually not under control in the rest of the world. But in South Korea, because of the steps that have been taken, the pandemic and the spread of the COVID-19 infections has been brought under control. But for these elections specifically, what measures have been taken to ensure that there is no further spread of the infection because of people queuing up at polling centres?
Mohammed, the government's been preparing for this for weeks now. They are taking very serious measures to make sure that the virus does not spread at the polls next week. If you want to vote in the election, the parliamentary election next Wednesday, don't show up with a fever. They're going to be temperature checking everyone who enters the polling locations. And if you have a fever, you're going to be sent back home, where there will be an option at some point to cast your ballot, but you won't be doing it at the polling booth that day. Anybody who's not wearing a mask, anybody who refuses to wear rubber gloves or use hand sanitizer as well, won't be able to cast their votes. And people are also required, Mohammed, to stand 1 meter apart when they're queuing. I think this will be a bit complicated. I think there's going to be a bit of confusion, especially if people pack in there. But as you mentioned, the early voting, that's really crucial, and that should cut down on some of the crowds that would normally show up on an election day when there's not an epidemic plaguing the country.
Right, and also the fact that the elections are still going ahead as normal. Was there any compulsion that the elections had to be held on the 15th of April? And also, at this point of time, do the health officials in South Korea feel that, the worst of the pandemic is behind them and there is perhaps no further possibility of a resurgence of infections?
Mohammed, part of the reason this election is going forward is simply because South Korea can. There has been no lockdown here. There's been no strict shelter-in-place orders. People are still able to come out. And so far, the public has done a good job abiding by social distancing guidelines, and they think that will carry over to the election. So, frankly, just the ability to do this because the numbers of COVID-19 have been falling is one of the reasons behind it. Also, I think the current administration of President Moon Jae-in, they want to double down on what appears to be a great victory for their government in fighting the coronavirus. They want the public to back them in this election, the ruling party. I think the opposition also has interest as well to continue to cast doubt on Moon's efforts, namely that he didn't close the border with China early in the outbreak, and that, according to the main opposition, led a lot of the viral cases in and led to the outbreak that did happen in the southeast.
Right.
Yes, overall, there is still concerns here. There could be a resurgence, to answer your second question there, and that's why a social distancing campaign has been extended in this country through April 19th. People, will they follow the orders? Well, just take a look at some of the videos we're seeing online and social media. South Koreans are coming out with the warm weather. They're getting back to the clubs, the bars. I think there are risks and concerns that there could be another viral outbreak here.
All right, and just before I let you go, Bruce, at this point of time, the fact that the elections are going ahead as normal, is there likely to be an impact in terms of the voter turnout of people who would actually come out voluntarily on the 15th of this month to cast their vote?
Well, what we're seeing with the early election returns is that a significant amount of people still want to come out and cast their ballots. Actually, the early voters this year is the most in South Korea's recorded history. I think that's because people are concerned about contracting the virus next week. But based on what we're reading so far, and based on the public's interest in this election, based on the early voting returns, I think we're still going to see plenty of people out next week, despite the concerns about the virus. But these safety measures in place seem pretty stringent and pretty practical to making sure people don't spread the virus. If South Koreans are crowding into parks right now and continuing to work together in office places, they can manage a line and a queue for voting, I believe.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, Bruce Harrison, for joining us and getting us all those insights in terms of an election during the time of a pandemic. And perhaps the only country that could pull off something like this is South Korea.